Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. There, but for the grace of bad English, goes the Japanese banking system. So said the ASO, in charge of Japan's finance ministry. He said that, and I paraphrase, Japan's banks emerged from the global credit crime crisis largely unscathed because managers did not speak English well enough to understand the complex bogus derivative contracts that the scamsters from Wall Street had successfully pushed on other suckers from around the world. Yes, what dumb luck for the Japanese banks to have avoided Jamie Dimon's interest rate swaps only to buy a boatload of Japanese government bonds. Oh, Stacy.
Yes. So here we're going to introduce this first headline. Poor English saved Japan's banks from crisis. This is from Taro Aso, the finance minister, and he says many people fell prey to the dubious products or so-called subprime loans. Japanese banks were not so much attracted to these products compared with European banks, Mr. Aso told a seminar in Tokyo. Managers of Japanese banks hardly understood English. That's why they didn't buy, he said.
Well, I can understand where he's coming from on that. You know, when I used to do a lot of French TV, I would call Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein curse words and names and all kinds of scatological references to their being. And the French, of course, didn't speak English, so they would just say, yes, I agree with you. That's fantastic.
Well, but the other thing, of course, is that he could argue this. But the fact is also that the English-speaking bankers did not understand a single thing they were buying, or the pension funds or the small-time investors had no idea what all the gobbledygook of even though the words themselves were in English, it was all just a complicated mishmash of the words jammed together to hide basic, simple fraud.
Well, you know, let's break this down a little bit more, because in Japan, they were not required to buy the collateralized debt obligations and all the flora and fauna of derivatives contracts that came out of the imagination and the ASO of many of Wall Street's financial engineers, because all Japan has had to do these past 10 years is to allow their interest rates to trade near zero, the cheapest interest rates in the world, to become what's called a funding currency. All these collateralized debt obligations sold by Goldman or JP Morgan or Deutsche Bank are financed with the interest rate cheap money of Japan. So Japan is the well from which all the cheap money comes to float the global quadrillion-dollar derivatives market. And it has been that way for 10 years, and this is why that bubble's about to burst. So they're not required to buy these derivatives that ASO is talking about. That's not their role. Their role is to finance the creation of these derivatives. And so the fact that he's saying, well, we didn't get into trouble because we don't understand English, he's just trying to make a joke that all our banks are somehow sound. They're not sound. They're sitting on all kinds of bad stuff because they've been the funding currency in the kamikaze currency called the Japanese yen. Kamikaze currency, Japanese yen.
Well, Max, now the market language is the price signal. So I want to talk about the price signal that nobody no longer understands because it's no longer translatable. People aren't able to understand what is being said by the price signal. CME pulls wash trade proposal. Now, first of all, Max, what is a wash trade?
Well, wash trades are a way to manipulate prices, manipulate markets. So let's say Google stock is at $600 a share or $700 a share. You throw in orders simultaneously to buy and sell, washing those orders at a price that you want the stock to go. So let's say the stock of Google is $600 and you want the price to go to $605. You throw enough simultaneously buy and sell orders at $605 until the price gets to $605. So if you have options that are going to pay off at a $605, and then you throw a lot of wash trades in to get the price to $605, then you make money without taking any risk. Or if you make a mistake, then the state bails you out. It's called communism in America.
Well, that's what people will argue, that a free market is the price is always right. The price signal is correct because for every buyer, there's a seller. For every seller, there's a buyer. But here you're saying that the guy buying is also selling. He's trying to manipulate the price. He's trying to create a price. Now, the CME group introduced some voluntary reporting of your wash trades. So basically, they're making it a rule, but the CFTC has squashed this for now because they say wash trades are banned by US law because they can feed false information into the market and be used to manipulate prices. Intentionally taking both sides of a trade can minimize financial risk for the trading firm while potentially creating a false impression of higher volume in the market. And Bart Chilton of the CFTC is saying that this is sort of what the high-frequency traders are doing. They're sending out loads of spoof trades and wash trades in order to create and benefit off from the rest of the market. They're scooping out wealth from the rest of the market.
Right. Well, instead of a price resulting from buyers and sellers in a process called price discovery, price is determined first or calculated first or mentioned first, and then you fill in the trades to get to that price. But this idea that there's no buyers without sellers, let's get back to the Japan being a funding currency as it relates to the Federal Reserve Bank and Jamie Dimon. So Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, they'll put on a bunch of wash trades using 0% money to get prices where they predetermine them to go through manipulation. And then the buyer and seller, or the buyer of all the debt that they use to get to that trade, is ultimately the Federal Reserve, which is backstopped by the Bank of Japan and ASO and a 0% interest rate. So that's where all the risk is. The buyers are the governments who are sitting on hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars of bad debt that they keep having to float and roll by quantitative easing. That's the buyer of all the wash trades, ultimately, that have been used to manipulate prices. And of course, the Edward Snowden scandal brings in the other dimension where allegedly firms like Booz Allen and others and Deloitte Touche and KPMG are involved in the data selling to make this even less risky.
So in effect, quantitative easing is a sort of wash trade because here the government of the United States is issuing debt and then they're buying their own debt in order to create what they want it to be the price signal. They want to send a price signal about the strength of the U.S. economy, about the strength of the U.S. dollar, about the strength of the reserve currency of the world.
Right. They say, look, it's deflation because interest rates are so low. But they're engaging in wash trades, selling debt and buying debt simultaneously to create that low interest rate that they say is deflationary. Meanwhile, they're inflating the biggest bond bubble in the history of the world, which is, as we've been saying and warning about, is in the process of bursting. Interest rates are ticking up, and this will be a fantastic, glorious collapse of the central planners of the Federal Reserve Bank and other central bankers.
Well, the global, real, genuine world reserve currency, the world reserve money, has always been gold, and that's the other side of this trade of the wash trade, the one that actually can't be wash traded away. So we're going to talk about gold here in this headline because this is another price signal that nobody no longer understands. It's suddenly the price signals are speaking another language that nobody understands but the ones manipulating. So we're going to turn to a little clip from CNBC, and they interview Rick Harrison of Porn
stars? Yeah, Rick Harrison has a part-time job as a pole dancer over there in CNBC for Maria Bartiromo. She apparently likes well-endowed portfolios.
Well, he's a pawn star, so he runs a massive pawn chain, and he has 4,000 customers a day just alone in his Las Vegas shop. So here's what he was asked by CNBC, what he thought of the falling price of gold.
Is business different where you are because of what's going on?
You know, I retail a lot of gold and silver, and I'm having a real difficult time right now getting physical metal. It's the crazy world about gold and silver. Sometimes, you know, the paper market it's going down, but you can't actually find no actual physical items.
But that's another aspect to the wash trade of gold price suppression. If you want interest rates low and you want the price of the dollar to be high, you simultaneously, again, wash trading over different asset classes, price of gold to be lower. And as this gentleman points out from Pawn Stars, that the demand for gold has never been higher, but the price is dropping. That's a clear indication of price manipulation. Same thing with the bond market. The supply of bonds has never been greater, and the prices have never been higher in 300 years in the UK or 238 years in America. That's a complete repudiation of supply and demand and the price discovery and economics as we know it.
We've seen reports over the past few weeks of unprecedented demand, tens of thousands of people lining up outside gold shops in China, in Dubai, in India, in Vietnam, in Bangkok. And yet, the price that keeps on being talked about on CNBC is the price signal being chased by, just like cats, chasing one of those laser pointers. If you go to YouTube and Google it, you'll see lots of cats chasing laser points. And they're being steered in a circle by a false price signal. They're chasing a price signal that is lying.
I call that price propaganda.
Yes.
People react to a price emotionally, like a cat to a laser dot on the wall. And if you can manufacture a price, you can get the masses of people to pant like dogs toward that price. And if you see this Dow Jones at 15,000, and that's a manufactured price, you see all the YouTubers and the tweeters, clapping like seals on the beach, like, oh, that means something, arf, 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 even though it's a price propaganda, it's meaningless.
Well, and then finally here, in terms of understanding language and price propaganda, they combined in this final headline. This is a follow-up on the Anglo-Irish tapes, #Anglo tapes. I'll probably punch Lenihan -drum. He told the world we are solvent. Now he can protect his €100 billion guarantee by writing us a €3 billion check. Get on with it. So this is David Drum, of course, the former CEO of Anglo-Irish, talking about his upcoming meeting with Brian Lenihan. And he said he was going to punch him and tell him, you've already offered us a €100 billion price guarantee. Just give us some money or else the markets are going to go crazy and investors are going to get scared and the population is going to be scared. Give it to us.
Yeah, well, look, here's a guy who's threatening violence against the Irish people and who bailed him out. And I've said all along that bankers, to deter them, they should maybe face capital punishment. And some people have said, no, capital punishment is too much. You can't engage in capital punishment. And yet, we're talking about a banker who threatened violence against the bank and the state unless they gave him billions of dollars. So the Irish people, you're never going to win this fight unless you're willing to fight this fight. But, keep picking them shamrocks, whatever you do. Guinness, hello. All right, Stacey Hibbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max. Yes. So here we're going to introduce this first headline. Poor English saved Japan's banks from crisis. This is from Taro Aso, the finance minister, and he says many people fell prey to the dubious products or so-called subprime loans. Japanese banks were not so much attracted to these products compared with European banks, Mr. Aso told a seminar in Tokyo. Managers of Japanese banks hardly understand.
I paraphrase, Japan's banks emerged from the global credit crime crisis largely unscathed because managers did not speak English well enough to understand the complex bogus derivative contracts that the scamsters from Wall Street had successfully pushed on other suckers from around the world. Yes, what dumb luck for the Japanese banks to have avoided Jamie Dimon's interest rate swaps, only to buy a boatload of Japanese government bonds. Oh, Stacey.
Understood English. That's why they didn't buy, he said.
Well, I can understand where he's coming from on that. When I used to do a lot of French TV, I would call Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein curse words and names and all kinds of scatological references to their being. And the French, of course, didn't speak English, so they would just say, yes, I agree with you. That's fantastic.
Well, but the other thing, of course, is that he could argue this.
Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. There, but for the grace of bad English, goes the Japanese banking system. So said the Aso in charge of Japan's finance ministry. He said that,
But the fact is also that the English-speaking bankers did not understand a single thing they were buying, or the pension funds or the small-time investors had no idea what all the gobbledygook of even though the words themselves were in English, it was all just a complicated mishmash of the words jammed together to hide basic, simple fraud.
well, let's break this down a little bit more because